Welcome everyone to our 5th annual and first virtual Pat Conroy Literary Festival. I'm Jonathan Haupt, Executive Director of the Pat Conroy Literary Center here in Beaufort, South Carolina. We're coming to you this evening from the set of By the River, the Telly Award-winning show, filmed right here at ETV Lowcountry. And we want to say thank you to everybody at ETV Lowcountry and Holly Jackson in particular. We also have the technical expertise this afternoon and throughout the festival weekend of Dr. Caroline Sawyer from USC Beaufort. I'm very grateful for that as well. And certainly I want to thank our lead festival sponsor, the trustees of the estate of Robert S. Handler, who've been supporting our festival for years now, making free programs like this possible for all of you who are in our Zoom room this afternoon and everybody watching on Facebook Live as well. This is our Before We Were Writers panel, and based on the number of registrations we've had for this, it's a very popular topic. So we're glad to be able to offer this program with a wonderful group of writers here on the set this afternoon. I'm going to introduce our moderator and then leave it to her to introduce the rest of our crew. And it's a great pleasure to get to introduce Stephanie Austin Edwards, who has been such a pleasure to get to know in my time here in Beaufort. And I've gotten to introduce Stephanie more than once as well. So often that on a week I don't get to introduce Stephanie, I go through a bit of withdrawal and I just call somebody up and tell them about Stephanie anyway. Stephanie was a high school classmate of Pat Conroy's, 2 years behind Pat at Beaufort High School. And it's like, as I like to say, an original witness to the writer that Pat Conroy would become. But Stephanie herself became a remarkable writer as well. And in between those two periods, she had an incredible career in New York on and off Broadway, a career that would be the envy of anybody wanting to be a theater professional. She's going to tell us a little bit about that life and her transition into her writing life back here in Beaufort. She's the author of a novel, What We Set in Motion, a fantastic book, an award winner as well. Stephanie also teaches classes for us at our Conroy Center and has been a phenomenal volunteer and friend to all of us here in Beaufort. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's on set with our 3 other guests for this afternoon session, Before We Were Writers. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, I'm just thrilled to be here today with the 3 of you. This is just really a fun topic. Before we were writers, how did we get from where we were to where we are now? I think that Jonathan did a great job in coming up with this topic. I'd like to introduce Dana Riddenhauer. She's a retired FBI agent and is now an award-winning author. During her 22-year career, she was assigned to 4 different FBI field divisions and had the opportunity to work a wide variety of cases, including multifaceted narcotics investigations, domestic sex trafficking of minors, and a violent crime. Dana's first novel, Behind the Mask, won a literary award. And then her second novel, Behind the Cabin, won another literary award. And then in 2018, Below the Radar won another literary award. So she has done a magnificent job of changing careers, and we're going to hear about that. And she lives now in Beaufort, South Carolina, here along with me. And over here is Dorothy St James. She's a former urban planner who was majored in wildlife biology and is now known for the White House Gardener Mystery Series, the Southern Chocolate Shop Mystery Series, the Beloved Book Room Mysteries. And all of this, she combines her love of libraries, her the small town Southern charm, and with a heaping helping of intrigue. Dorothy was raised in the South and lives in Charleston, South Carolina currently. And on my left is the New York Times bestselling novelist, Brad Taylor, who was born in Okinawa, Japan, but grew up on 40 acres in rural Texas. He went to the University of Texas, and he became commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the U.S. Army Infantry and had a fascinating career as a special ops officer. He published his first book in 2011, One Rough Man, which was immediately a success and launched the Pike Logan series. Now with more than 13 installments and more than 2 million copies sold, the series has consistently hit the New York Times bestseller list. He also lives in Charleston, South Carolina with his wife and 2 daughters. So welcome, and so glad to see you all here today. So what I'd like to start with, after I remember to do this, is we're going to have a series of questions for our authors so we can get to know what it was that they did before, and then where and how their world changed, and they decided that they were going to leave the career that they had and move into writing, because here we have three very successful authors, and I think it's always fascinating to know the story behind their stories. What I want to know is what brought you into your career in the first place, and then what was your literary life like, if you had one at all during that, but at some point it had to change over into thinking about literature from what you were doing. And then how did you know that you wanted to be a writer? How did that really take over you? And were there any influences in your life, any other authors, novels, etc., that pushed you forward into the writing life that you now have? And of course, that would mean also selecting the genres that you all have selected along the way. So I'm going to start with myself, since it's the easiest for me to do. And I'm going to answer these questions this way. One thing I know about Pat Conroy, because as you know, we went to high school together, is that Pat told me later on when I came back to Beaufort that, you know what, Stephanie, I never did anything after Defusky Island when I was teaching except be a writer. He didn't have a career before. He had a very short career as a teacher, and he moved right into writing about his experience on Defusky Island that was followed by the next book, the next book, and the next book. So he used to really kind of laugh at the fact that he was able to do it that way, which is a blessing in a lot of ways. And the fact that that's just the way his life unfolded. It was really, really cool. So my book is called What We Set in Motion. It's the story of a young woman from the South who wants to go to New York, and she wants to have a career in theater, and only to find out that as soon as she tells her parents about it, they say, oh, no way, you're not going to do that. I'm not supporting you. You can't do it. And her life just starts to fall apart. But then she tries to figure out how she's going to set her life in motion without the support of anyone. So that we all write what we know. Just about all of us write exactly what we know. At least that's how we start our books out. So I started dancing when I was 5 years old. My father was in the military, was a Marine Corps officer. We started moving. So if there was ever a thread in my life that was consistent, it was my dancing. I might have moved schools and moved friends for many, many years, but I always went to dance school. So that started early for me. And then luckily, my father was transferred clear across country, but he was transferred into Virginia, North and South Carolina. So I do feel like I was raised in the South, probably like you feel, Dorothy, and that I was very blessed to have ended up in junior high and high school in Beaufort, South Carolina. Got to know some of the most wonderful people along the way that I've ever had the honor to meet. And one of those was Pat Conroy. Now, we didn't know he was going to become a writer. We didn't know anything. We didn't even know he thought he was going to be a basketball player. He did play basketball with my brother, so I watched them all the time. Pat and I were on the literary magazine together, so I had my writing aspirations way back then. And we were in French class together. And on top of that, I also met my husband-to-be, Paul Kaufman. Well, Paul and Pat were very good friends. But then all of this went off in different directions for a very long time. Came back. So I came back here about 25 years ago. And my husband, Paul, came back shortly after, or at some point during that. So what I did was I went to school went to college in California. And when I was actually going for my master's, I said, well, I don't know if I'm going to do this. If I'm going to dance, I got to do it now. You got to do it while you're young. You can't wait until you're 30 years old. So I just packed up and went to New York. I have danced in lots of different musicals. I danced in Damn Yankees, Fiddler on the Roof, Guys and Dolls, and Funny Girl. I danced in modern dance companies. I had my own company for a while. I taught in college. So I had quite a variety of a career, which is what you do in theater. You have to be flexible and ready to move to the next next thing. At one point, somebody came up to me and said, would you like to have a job working in costumes rather than waiting tables? Because yes, we know most people in theater wait tables for the money to pay for everything else. I said, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. So I went out to Jones Beach and started working the costumes behind the scene. I said, I know how to do this. I grew up sewing my own costumes, grew up sewing my own clothes. Military families often do that, or at least they did in those days. And one thing led to another. And before you knew it, I was a Broadway supervisor of major musicals on Broadway. And I was like, I just kind of turned around and there I was. And sometimes I have 30 people under me working on some of these shows. So I worked on Peter Pan, on Golden Pond before it was a movie. I worked on Dreamgirls. I worked on any number, Woman of the Year with Lauren Bacall. The list is somewhere in the back of my head. I don't remember them all. So the people I worked with would be like Sandy Duncan, Liza Minnelli, Cheetah Rivera, Lauren Bacall, the cast, of course, of Dreamgirls, Jason Alexander, before he was in Seinfeld. We worked on 2 shows together. Kelly McGillis, Jeff Daniels, Henry Winkler, which was an interesting story on its own, and Donald Sutherland. And there's probably a lot of others in there that I can't think of. But we were working fast and furious, as you do in theater, and you work long hours. At some point, and I did work with Hal Prince. I worked 3 shows with Hal Prince and with Stephen Sondheim. Then I moved we didn't have much in the way of TV shows in New York in those days, but I was asked to come over when they started The Cosby Show. Now, please don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. The show is brilliant and just deserves all the accolades that it ever got before. It was just a wonderful, wonderful show. I worked on Woody Allen films. There was a movie called House on Carroll Street. And then one of the more interesting ones that I worked on would have been, I was asked to work on a music video, and it was a Michael Jackson music video. Well, I had never worked on a music video before. And I thought, okay, I'm not doing a Broadway show right now. I'm not doing a movie. I'll do this. It's supposed to be a 10-day shoot. Well, it ended up being 3.5 weeks, 16, 18 hours a day, no days off. But it was the Bad video. If you remember the Bad video, well, you probably don't remember who the director was. It was Martin Scorsese. Probably the only music video that Martin Scorsese ever directed. So it was Martin Scorsese, Michael Jackson, and Quincy Jones. Of course, he went wherever Michael went, which Quincy Jones was there. So at one point I was going to write a book that was called Michael, Martin, Quincy, and Me. But I haven't done that. So I actually have an Ollie class that I have put together that I've done a number of times called Inside Stories, a journey through Broadway film and television that tells some of the extra stories that goes on behind the scenes, because I do believe that stories inform all of us as human beings. It's not always just gossipy stuff. Sometimes we really learn a lot about what we want to do and what we don't want to do by getting involved in the stories of other people. And there's some really, really wonderful stories that have come out of my career in Broadway film and television. And then all of a sudden, at one point, life had a big change, and it was time to leave New York. Then I came back to Beaufort. And that was really one of the best decisions that I ever made. Although at the time I thought you couldn't pull me out of New York with a crowbar. But then, yeah, I started missing the trees and the rivers and the dolphins and everything. It was wonderful. And of course, during the time that I was dancing, I was working on costumes, I was going to opening night parties, the whole New York kind of thing. Pat Conroy's first book comes out, The Water is Wide. And my brother says, "Did you see this?" "No, what is that?" "Oh, Pat's written a book." "No kidding." "Well, good for him." Then the next one comes out, Great Santini. Then the next one, Lords of Discipline. And then, of course, The Prince of Tides comes after that. Did I say The Water is Wide first? Mm-hmm. Yes. So it was so interesting to watch this progression. So while I'm working, and I know as you all were too, furiously and fast at whatever your careers were, in the back of my mind, Pat's image was looming. And like all of those ideas of going back and writing were just sounding wonderful to me. And I did take classes at the New School for Social Research. I took short story classes. Sometimes there'd be 60 people in the class. And I would take at the Inglewood Writing Center. So I would sort of have that little split personality of going down into the Broadway film and television side and then coming back over to the quieter side of writing, which was growing and growing in me. And when I got back to Beaufort, luckily, I was able to rekindle my relationship with Pat. He had only been here a couple of years. He was getting together with Sandra at the time. And it was right after he did published Beach Music. And so it was just a wonderful journey. And finally, I started a writer's group and wanted to keep my writing going. And finally, I published my book. And unfortunately, that was the same year that Pat passed away. So I'm a little slower than you guys about writing, but I do it and I'm consistent and I write short stories, etc. I told Sandra right away, whatever it is you do to honor Pat, I want to be part of it. Let me know whatever it is. And by October, they had brought Jonathan Hout down to be our executive director of the center. They got the center up and running, and it is just one of the most fun and magnificent places to go and be. If you love reading or you love writing, this is the place to be around, because Pat's presence is there 24/7, and that was what his mission was to encourage writing and reading in everyone. That was, if all you wanted to do was read, perfect. If all you want to do was write, well, all writers read also, but you know what I'm saying? That is what his mission was. And so this center is really so beautifully put together for that. And Jonathan does such a beautiful job of putting together all the events that go on at the Pat Conroy Literary Center. So that's enough about me. And let me switch now over to Dana and ask the same question. What got you into the FBI? What happened during there to get you to thinking about writing? And what got you to move on to it?
Okay. Well, I grew up in a law enforcement home. My father was a police officer and was growing up. And so I was always interested in his cases. I would get into his investigations and his notes when I wasn't supposed to, and look at grisly crime pictures. And my mother wasn't very happy about that. So I think it was in my DNA. There was no doubt that I was going to probably end up in law enforcement. But how the FBI came about was, I was also a band geek, and I was in band, and we went to Washington, D.C. for a band contest. And part of our trip included a trip to the FBI headquarters. So we went to the FBI headquarters, and I told everybody after that I was going to be an FBI agent. So all of my high school yearbooks say good luck in the FBI.
Oh, yeah.
So I was 15 years old when I made my career decision. I knew I was going to be an FBI agent, which was probably a great thing for my parents, because I knew I had to stay clean, no drugs. I had to be, I had a clean record. So my parents were pretty lucky there. I didn't get into some of the mischief that a lot of teenagers got into, probably because I knew at an early age I wanted to be an FBI agent. So I went to college and went into police administration and psychology because I wanted to chase serial killers. I thought that's what the FBI did. So I was going to chase serial killers. And I wanted the psychology background as well. Well, I get finished with college and I go to see the FBI, and they say, you're too young. You have to be 23 years old to get in. You need experience, go to law school. And so I did. At the time, they were hiring lawyers and accountants. I can't count past fingers and toes. So I decided, okay, I'll go the law school route. So I went to law school, had planned on coming out and going straight into the FBI at that point. And lo and behold, the federal job freeze hit, right, as I was graduating law school. And I thought, oh man, what am I going to do now? So I did what you would think, I went to South Carolina and I got a job on a tour boat. I did not want to be a lawyer. I did take the bar. So one day my dad was talking to me. He goes, well, you need to retake the bar. And I said, well, why? He goes, well, to pass it. I said, I passed it the first time. And he goes, what are you talking about? You're working as a first mate on a tour boat. You need to get your job as a lawyer. So I did. Because this job freeze, they told me would last a few months, and it turned out to last 3 years. So I ended up practicing law in South Carolina for a short time, but quit and went back to the tour boat after a while, because my love has always been nature and being outdoors. Didn't want to be a lawyer. I only went to law school to get in the FBI. Then finally one day the phone call came from the FBI. So I went to the FBI. I went in when I was 29 years old and made a career out of it. I spent the next 21 years as an agent. Loved it. It was great. I was transferred around quite a bit. I was in Mobile, Alabama, my first office. Second office was the Caribbean. I was on St. Croix and worked out of the San Juan division. Did a lot of drug trafficking work there. Then Los Angeles, and finally Florida. I ended the career in Florida. Along the way, a few years into it, my supervisor came to me and said, you look younger than what you are. You don't really look like an FBI agent. We think you'll be good for the undercover program. And boy, have I got the case for you. Well, anytime a supervisor says that, you should run. But I fell for it. And the next thing you know, I was working in the extremist groups in California as a vegan, living in a commune because none of the other FBI agents wanted to do that kind of undercover. But I spent approximately 7 years almost in a row. It was 4 years on one case and then another 3 years in deep cover, meaning I didn't come out. I was under 24/7. I didn't see my family, didn't see my friends. It's kind of a lonely existence. Everybody thinks this is a great thing because it's on television that it's great. So, but it's a very lonely existence. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to write the books. I wanted to show that side of the FBI, that the psychological impact that undercover work takes on an agent. So that's why I chose to write an undercover series. But I spent 21 years as the FBI agent. I didn't think about a second career. I just wanted to get through the first one alive. And I wasn't thinking about being a writer. But I did, on my mom's request, I kept journals, especially when I was working undercover. And I kept them in the ceiling panels of my undercover apartment. And I jotted down just notes and feelings and emotions and things that I were going through. So when I was in my last move, I picked up all the journals and I started flipping through them. And I said, wow, I could write a book. I could write a book about this. And I thought, well, I'll write a book for my mom because my mother is a huge reader. And I've always been a huge reader too, but she's always wanted a writer. So I thought, well, I'll write a book for my mom. And I still wasn't thinking of a career as a writer. So I write the first draft and get the manuscript done of Behind the Mask. And I let a couple of people look at it and they're like, oh, no, you've got to publish this. This can't just be for your mother. And lo and behold, the career was launched. I retired from the FBI, and the very next day, I launched the first book, which was absolutely idiotic looking back because I didn't have a platform. I didn't know any. I didn't have social media. It was just, I learned by mistakes. I will tell you that much, especially with the first book. I made a lot of mistakes along the way. But it was great. It was fun, and I wouldn't change it. But so as far as the transition from FBI agent to writer, I hate to say it was an accident, but it was sort of an accident. It just happened. And then the second book, I wanted to write a love story to the Lowcountry because I am, like you, a huge Pat Conroy fan. And I grew up reading all his books, and I love the Lowcountry. So I set the second book in the Lowcountry. And by the time the third book came along, I was just addicted to writing, and it wasn't going to stop. So at that point, I had to finally admit that I'm a writer.
Wow, a very good story. Excellent story. All right, Dorothy, I'm going to turn to you now.
Well,
Ask the same thing.
yeah, well, one of my earliest memories is enjoying books. And my sisters, who are 4 and 5 years older than me, they were in school already, and they had an assignment to make a book. They in elementary school they have the assignments to make a book, and I made one too, and I so enjoyed that. And I was like, even as I think I was 4 at the time, 4 or 5 between, I want to be a writer. And that's where I
4 or 5.
really started telling people I'm going to write books, and I started writing them. And the teachers in elementary school were all very supportive and encouraging. And then you get to middle school and high school, and I clashed with every English teacher I have ever had. And it just became one of those dreams that seemed too dear. I couldn't go after it. And at the same time, I love animals, and I loved watching nature programs and reading about animals, and especially primates. And so I was thinking, well, maybe that's the direction I should go. Maybe I should do things for conservation, to help animals. And so when it was time to decide what to do and go to college, I thought about writing, and all that memory of clashing with my teachers, I couldn't do that. I couldn't put myself through that. So I went to school in a wildlife biology, which I loved. I really didn't like high school. I was ready to drop out. I thought being a garbage man would be a good career move because then I wouldn't have to be in school anymore. But in college, when you're learning about something and you have a goal, I really enjoyed all the classes. And I did have to take an English class, and yeah, I clashed with her too. And so the writing dream just it stayed away. But I was always reading. My family would always be reading, like Lillian Jackson Broom's books I see on the shelf there, the Cat Who series. We read all of those as a family. We would just pass them around and then talk about it. And I came from a family of readers. And my mom she was a school teacher, and she would write children's books that she'd want to get published, and she never could find a way to get it published. And so I watched that too. And so I think that also became part of who I wanted to be. And in college, as I was learning about protecting the environment, I joined a group there that put together a plan for Clemson University, where I went to clean up, make sure be conservation for the whole college. And I was part of that group. And as I learned more about conservation, it shifted from learning about animals, wanting to take care of animals, to we really need to protect the environment. And how best to do that is urban planning. Where do we build? How do we build? And so after I graduated in wildlife biology, I did work for the DNR in inshore fishing in Charleston for a year, sort of a gap year, as I decided exactly what I wanted to do, where we'd catch fish, tag them, and it was very exciting and fun and cold in the winter. But that's not, as much as I love the university setting and learning things, I really felt like I needed to be working more in the urban planning. So I went to school to learn how to be an urban planner and worked in government. I've only had government positions. I've worked in federal level, state level, local level, in urban planning. And especially I worked at the Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester Council of Governments. And one thing that they do is, when you're an urban planner for a council of governments, the small towns don't have enough staff to do everything. So I would be farmed out to these small rural communities to help them form plans and zoning laws. And that's where the spark came back, is going out to the small towns. One of my favorite was St. Stephen in Berkeley County. It's this adorable little town. And I don't mean idyllic, like beautiful buildings, because it's not. All these towns are economically depressed.
Right.
And they look economically depressed, but the people there, I just fell in love with the people and their stories. Because we would meet, and it was always a nighttime meeting. So I was always going out way far away from my house with these really late meetings. And they would just sit around the table and tell about their history and what they want for their town and what the history of the town was. And St. Stephen was very interesting in that they worked together. It was a very diverse group. Not all of the towns were diverse like that. This was a very diverse group. And both Black and white would see their children, there's no opportunity, and they'd move away until they are ready to retire. And that's when people come back, and they're just struggling with trying to figure out how to keep people in their town so they can have families in town. And just hearing those stories brought me back. And so one day I said to my husband, and we were living on Folly Beach at the time, if not now, when? I've been
That's what I
trying
said.
for this. Exactly. And I actually said also, I should try to do this when we're young enough to be able to afford our own health insurance. Because if he worked for himself at the time, so the health insurance we had was through my job. And we're very deliberate people. We budgeted my salary out of the equation by getting rid of not going out to dinner so much, not buying new clothes so much, refinancing the house, redoing our insurances so they're lower, and making sure that my salary wasn't needed. And I did that. Once we did that, I continued to work for 6 months, putting money aside and making sure that it was okay. Plus, then we'd have that much money set aside before I then told my job, you know, I'm going to write now. And it felt like it was scary. I was sweating, like I was confessing some great sin or something, coming out of a closet. I'm a writer. and I'm going to quit this job now and go write, even though I had been writing nights and weekends, but it was never anything good and never anything publishable. I just felt like I needed to take a chance on myself, and so I did. And my stories, though, are all set in small towns because that's what, from my job, what I heard and what I really did fall in love with, the stories again.
That's wonderful. So you fell right into it after you actually deliberately said, we're going to budget our way to having the space to do it. And
That's
I think
right.
that's just incredible. So again, like Dana, she just had to go and be a lawyer. She didn't really want to be. And you had to be an urban planner, and you didn't really necessarily want to be there, but you worked through that into what became beautiful careers. So then I'm going to turn to Brad, because Brad has a really interesting story to tell as well.
Yeah, I kind of, unlike you, I kind of fell into the Army. I was a student at University of Texas freshman year, and I was a very, very poor student. I was flunking out of school, basically. And so my father said, if you flunk out of school, you're going in the Army. And that was back in the BLU-can-be days. And I was like, the Army? Who goes in the Army? Nobody goes in the Army. And I was convinced I was flunking out. So I started researching the Army. You're going in the Army. You're not going back to school. And in the research, I was like, this doesn't sound too bad to me. I mean, you jump out of airplanes, you run around the woods with a gun. You get paid to do all this. And I discovered Ranger battalions and special forces and that kind of stuff. And because I grew up on a farm and camped and hunted and all that, spent most of my time in the woods. And so as fate would have it, I did not flunk out. I came back the next year and I joined ROTC. So I said, okay, I am going in the Army. That's what I'm going to do. What I call my second freshman year. So
Your second freshman year.
And so I went through ROTC, went through the Army, got commissioned in the infantry, then tried out for special forces and went through that. I actually went through Ranger school and airborne school while I was still in school because I wasn't sure if I could hack it. So in my mind, I was saying, if I go to those schools and I don't make it through, then it's before I've signed a commission. So I can go find something else. I'll be a shoe salesman or something. But if I make it through those schools, then I know I can hack special forces and I'll take my commission. So that's basically what happened. I went to Airborne Ranger and then took a commission in the infantry. And as soon as I was able, I think it was 4 years in, I tried out special forces and went back to Okinawa, which this is kind of a side note, but it's kind of cool. My daughter's born in Okinawa.
Oh.
And I was born in Okinawa.
Yeah, both of you then, yeah.
Well, we were born in the same hospital, and they only have 4 birthing rooms. They never change. So there's 1 in 4 chance my daughter was born in my room. But there's no way to tell. But
Oh, that's cool.
anyway, so I served in the 1st Special Forces Group over there, and then eventually tried out for a Special Mission Unit at Fort Bragg, and then spent the rest of my time at the Special Mission Unit. Along the way, I've always been a voracious reader. I've never had any instruction in writing. I don't have an English degree or anything like that. I basically took the easiest degree I could get because that's all you needed for a commission. And so I have an advertising degree. But I've always read, I went through, you were asking, earlier what genres have infected you or whatever. I went through all of them, every one of them. I had a Ray Bradbury phase, and I had a Piers Anthony phase, and I had a Stephen King phase, and just read them all and learned something from all of those books. So that my instructors were always other writers. I just picked out what I thought would be good. And in the back of my head, I always thought I was going to write a book. It was just kind of a bucket list thing. It wasn't.
Oh, you did though. You thought you.
I always did. Yeah, I always thought, one of these days I'm going to write a book. And kind of like she said, when are you going to do that? When I was at Fort Bragg, there just obviously was never any time, especially after 9/11. So there was no time to do anything like that. And after my squadron command, I wanted to take a break basically from all the deployments. And I knew I have a twin brother who graduated from the Citadel. My dad graduated from the Citadel. So I knew that the Army department down there, the XO of that department, was a special forces guy. So I called him up. In fact, I was in Iraq when I called him and said, how'd you get that job? Because I'm coming into my command time here and I need to go somewhere. And he told me how to do it. And I put the paperwork in and all this kind of stuff and ended up going to teach the assistant professor of military science at the Citadel. And it was like getting off a bullet train and crawling. I mean, I had so much time on my hands. I mean, I really enjoyed my time there. The cadets were great and teaching was great. But once you build your classes, it's kind of rinse and repeat. You're doing the same thing over and over again. I had a lot of time on my hands. So I told my wife one day, I said, I think I'm going to write a book. And she said, whatever, you go, Brad. You write yourself a book. And so I did. I wrote my first book, One Rough Man. And then I figured it'd just sit on the bedside table, but it was purchased to be published. And so then I had to really make a choice because I couldn't put the book out if I was going back to Bragg. I was supposed to be going back to Bragg. So I came out on the list for full colonel. My daughter was entering high school, and my next assignment was 2 years unaccompanied in Southwest Asia. So there's a lot of competing interests, and I just sold a book. But if I was going to stay in the special mission world, then there's no way there could be a book published. It just wouldn't happen. And so, I talked about it with my wife and everything, because that's a huge leap of faith, kind of like you were saying. If I leave the military, that's a huge warm cradle. Everything in the military it's there to support you. And if we leave, and I'm going to try to give writing a try, what happens if this book's a complete failure? Now what are we going to do? But my wife's father was a B-52 pilot. And when she went to high school, she went to 4 high schools in 4 years. And she did not want that to happen with our daughter. And we talked about it a long time, back and forth, what we're going to do. And I decided to, so I called up promotion branch and said, I don't want the promotion. You can have it. And I'm putting in my retirement paperwork. And I'm going to be a writer.
Wow.
So it actually took a while to be a writer. I spent a lot of time doing security consulting, security contracting with private military companies and everything because kids still have to eat. So, I mean, it's not like the book was paying a huge amount of money right off the bat. But then the book did real well. And so my, editor's like, you're going to write another one. I said, sure, I can do another one. And then when I started doing the writing, the problem is that I write current events. And the problem with current events is they're current. If something goes wrong in the real world, it could make my book worthless. For instance, back then in 2011, we were really rattling sabers against Iran. And my first book had a huge Iran component. If we went to war against Iran in the real world, the book's worthless now. Right. Because that's the end of it. Right. So I used to rant and rave to my editor, what's taking so long? Because I get the book in 6 months early. Because I would look at my schedule and say, I've got to do contracting from July to January or whatever. So it's due in December. Well, it's going to have to be in by July because I'm not going to have time to write otherwise. And then I would say, what's taking you so long? Put that book out. And of course, like you, I didn't know anything about the publishing world. And so they're saying, you're not our only author. Your book is going to go out when it's going to go out. And I did that for 3 books, I think. And they said, okay, Smarty Pants, we'll do one every 6 months if that's what you want to do. And so I did do that for about 4 years, and it about crushed me. But by then things started working. And it wasn't until my 7th book that I actually was willing to tell people I was a writer.
Your 7th book?
Yeah, I just didn't feel like it. I still kind of don't. I feel like an imposter. So
interesting.
I mean,
You're just moving so fast, you didn't have time to enjoy it.
well, I mean, I certainly enjoyed it. I enjoy writing. I enjoy the, everything that has to do with publishing, but I just felt awkward. Like if you're in an airplane. So what do you do? I would say, oh, I'm a security consultant. I would never tell them
That you're on your 7th book.
Right. So eventually, my wife's like, would you quit that? Because she wants to sell books. So she's like, he's a writer. Here's a card.
Yeah.
But that's what happened with me.
Oh, that is so wonderful. And that's one of the things that I try and tell people that, I do consulting with writing and I have writers groups, that you're going to have to find that place after you've written a book where you're actually stepping across the threshold and promoting your own work. You're going to have to be proud of it. As you find out that people love your book so much, don't you find that you become prouder and prouder of what it is that you do? You don't have to be, your ego doesn't have to take over, but to be willing to make that leap to say, I am a writer and this is my book and it is worth reading, is something that writers don't take into consideration in the beginning, that they're going to have to do that phase.
I still don't like doing it.
You still don't like doing it. So
that's why I have my wife.
But your wife does that. So I think that's perfect. Well, we're going to ask the next thing, which is, I think you all talked about influence. Does anybody have any particular, other than the ones you read? You didn't know any other authors?
No.
Firsthand. Dana, did you know any other authors?
No,
Firsthand?
not any firsthand
You
authors
just-
at the time.
You knew once you pulled your journals down that you had stories.
Right.
And
And,
that was-
I've always been a reader. My mother and I would go to the library from as long as I can remember. As soon as I could walk, we were going to the library.
Yeah.
So and like Brad, I read all genres. So,
Right.
and I think I learned something from every genre that I
Yeah,
read.
you did. You read all genres.
Mhm.
And how about you, Dorothy?
Yeah, just like them, I read whatever I can get my hands on, but I didn't know any writers.
And you didn't know any writers. So
No,
isn't
it was
that wonderful?
Huge leap of
So
faith.
you just move forward with the desire, and the skills came along with it. Basically, you had the stories. That's the hardest part, really. Is do you have a good story? You have to have a good story, and then somebody can help you shape that story.
Well, I had a lot of, like she was saying, when I first wrote One Rough Man, I didn't have chapters because I didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was pretty rough. I mean,
Yeah.
Here's how little I didn't know about the publishing world. So I was going to send it to an agent, and I didn't know how many, because word count is what everything is. How many words do you have? Because people always ask, do you have pages?
And I don't
Well,
want
it's
it
word
too
count.
many, too
It's
long
word
or
count.
too
It's
short.
word count. Well, I didn't know that. I went through pages. So I went to my bookshelf and pulled off 5 hard bags and counted the words on each page for 5 pages, did the average,
Right.
and then increased my font size in Word so it would be an actual page of a book. So then when I sent that to an agent, they're like, "What is this?" I didn't know any better.
It's perfect. I mean, you did exactly what you thought needed to be
Right.
done. And that the story of Pat, for his first book, he didn't know anybody, and he went through the yellow pages to find somebody to submit it to. And he got people all over Beaufort to type up chapters. So they did it on yellow lined paper, they did it on personal stationery, they did it on blank stuff. They put it all together, and he kind of tied it up and sent it off to the agent in the yellow pages, and the guy was ready to just put it right into the trash, and he read the first page. And then he had to keep reading. So what you don't know shouldn't get in your way of your desire to do what it is that you do. So leaving the career, I think you all sort of covered that part of this, what leaving the career, you were just ready. It was time. It was time. The book, you had a book and somebody picked it up. You sold yours immediately, and yours came shortly thereafter, but you had a plan to get there. You had a definite plan to get there.
I did not sell immediately.
No.
I had 4 years of rejection slips. So, yeah,
Very humbling, aren't they?
yes, in lots of different books. So
But that just
I was not an overnight
you-
success. I had a lot of learning to do.
Cool. So we've all had a lot of different experiences in that. So let's talk about what you're working on now, Dana.
Well, I'm working on a 4th novel, but it's not a Lexie Montgomery book. It's changing genres for a while. I've had this story floating around in my head forever, and I finally decided to write it. I think everybody expects the FBI genre from me, so I wanted to write something different. So I'm working on the 4th novel, but I'm also at the same time working on a screenplay to adapt the Lexie Montgomery series into 3-season television series. So that's taking the majority of my time, is working on the screenplay, because it's a whole different animal, and I've had
Yes.
to learn how to write a whole completely different way than novel writing.
Correct. And that people think they should be able to translate because they can write a novel into screenplays, and it's
Right.
I think Pat even tried that, and it's very, very, very difficult.
Oh, I wouldn't do it without my partner. My partner is a screenplay writer, and she's excellent.
It worked out.
Yeah, it worked out great.
All right, and Dorothy, you have one coming out.
Yeah, I have one coming out. It's the new series of the beloved book rooms, The Broken Spine. And I'm working on the 3rd book now of that series. And it takes place in a small rural town in South Carolina. And my main character is an assistant librarian. And the town, in an effort to get more people to come, industries to come to the town, decided they're going to become very techno forward, become the Silicon Valley of the South. And so they turned their library into a bookless library, all electronic. And this, my heroine is just horrified by this, and she steals all the books and starts her own little secret library in the basement where people can still get the printed word. And of course, then when the town manager who was spearheading this change dies, she's the main suspect.
I guess so.
Because she really spoke out against that change.
That's a fascinating premise.
Yeah.
Brad?
I have American Traders coming out in January, and it deals with artificial intelligence and the Chinese trying to take over Taiwan, the Taiwan Strait, deep fake videos, and the ongoing Chinese hegemony that's going on over there right now is Spratly Islands and things like that.
Very cool. So I think your dad must be very proud of you at this point, that you were about to flunk out.
Yeah.
It was get in that
Worked
school.
out.
Yeah, get in that school and get in the Army or else. So, and that's kind of what happened to Pat Conroy. He had no choice. He was told he was going to the Citadel. Didn't really want to be there. But look what emerged from that experience for him. And so I do have a second novel called Oyster Island that I'm working on, and I don't know when it's going to be finished, but I'm working on it. So Jonathan, I think we've probably covered a good bit here, and you have some questions?
We have some good writerly questions from the chat too. Obviously, we've got a lot of writers who are interested in this topic. So I'm going to ask them in this order. This first one's from our friend Sally, who's actually participated in some workshops that we've done. And her question is it too late for a 70-year-old to begin a career in writing? Is there ageism in the industry?
No, in my estimation, it's only in your head. There shouldn't be. If you've got something to say and you know how to put it together, just do it. It is just a fun way to spend your creative time, and other writers are so incredible. That's what I want to say, being around other writers, because I have a writers group. I now have the Pat Conroy Literary Center. We get to be around each other a lot, and Pat encouraged all of that. That was a big deal with Pat. And so I would say, do not worry about writing, about your age of writing. It would be my estimate. Is just do it.
Yeah, I'd like to add the writers group that I was in when I first started out. There was a wonderful writer, and she published her first book at 80.
Oh, good.
And published many, many more.
And publish more. See,
So,
I'd say people are really more interested that you have a really good story to tell. They're not looking for how old you are.
No, and I wouldn't put my age in the query letter.
Definitely not. But that's a good question, and I totally understand the concern.
Our keynote presenter at last year's Conroy Festival was Delia Owens, who was a debut novelist at 70, had other books out a little earlier than that in her previous career, but also international New York Times bestseller for a seemingly infinite number of weeks, first novel at 70. So,
Right, in multiple languages it's been translated into.
yes, absolutely. So there's a question from Kathy in here about reviews. Do reviews matter to you, positive or negative? Do you think they help sell books? And I assume she means published reviews, but you might also speak about customer reviews or anything that's out there to be seen about your book as an endorsement. Do those matter to you?
They matter to me in the sense that just for marketing purposes, if she's talking about the published type stuff, if you can pull some good pull quotes from it, you always have to use a ... when they're poking in the eye, so you can get the good piece and the other good piece and
Yes.
stitch it together.
Yes.
But I think it helps in the marketing side of the house.
But also, is it concerning? Is it concerning when you get a bad review?
I mean, I used to read every review on Goodreads and Amazon, but now there's just so many of them I can't keep up with them. But
Right.
the only time it upsets me is when somebody writes something that is just absolutely ridiculous. Like I have a 1-star review for Enemy of Mine where this detective is so stupid he can't do anything right. He almost froze to death in Denmark. I'm like, detective? What are you talking about? The book has nothing to do with Denmark. So you contact Amazon and say, this guy's reviewing the wrong book. I don't know what he's talking about. And Amazon will come back and say, well, he didn't violate our terms of service. He didn't threaten you or anything like that. So it stands.
Yeah.
And that aggravates me.
Yeah. Dana, do you have any?
Well,
Have you had any bad reviews?
and luckily so far, knock on wood, I haven't had any bad reviews. I've had a couple of people that read the first book that were obviously animal rights people and vegan, and they would say some stuff like that. But my answer to them is, have you read the book? Because
Right.
everybody thinks because I'm an FBI agent, I naturally bash the extremists
Right.
and stuff, but I really don't. I mean, I hold the extremists up to the highest light because I actually have a great appreciation for the activists and in the animal rights world. So, I've had a couple of people who obviously didn't read the book.
Right.
They were just going to slam me because, they were vegan and.
Well, and it's some sort of social media. You don't have to have a face.
Right.
You do it behind,
Mhm.
behind a blank wall just
Right.
because you can. Dorothy, do you have anything
Yeah.
to say on that?
I love to get the reviews from the major reviewers like Publishers Weekly, Book List, and all that. Does it hit the needle on sales? It's nice to be able to say that you have those reviews, but I don't know that it really sells books that much. A lot of people most readers don't even know those
Right.
booksellers. I have had, the publishers will often ask other bigger name authors to blurb your book, and they put that on the cover. And I've had at book signings, books sold that way go, oh, I like that author, I will buy your book. And I find that's actually more helpful.
Oh, that's good. What else?
So yeah, we actually have a couple more in here too. And one is specifically for Brad and Dana, although you all are welcome to address it if you find a way in. This is from Brian, who says, I too spent a career in the Army and law enforcement where I maintained a very private life. How are you adapting to being a public person in social media and marketing? Do you ever worry about your personal safety because of your previous careers?
I get this question quite a bit.
I do too.
Because especially I spent the last 13 years of my career undercover. So I was really under the radar as far as any kind of persona. I didn't have a Facebook account. I didn't have Twitter. I didn't have none of that stuff because I couldn't because of the facial recognition programs. So I went completely from being completely anonymous to, hey, here's my picture. I'm an author. Here's my book. And of course, I did a lot of the targets that I worked, found out about it. It was written up in Huffington Post before the book ever came out. And so I was getting threats before the book ever was published. They had started with threats. So I kind of knew that was going to be something that I was going to have to deal with. But it was very difficult because, as you know, you go from watching your back and suspicious of everybody to now you've got to take on this whole role where you've got to be friendly to people and you've got to talk to people and you've got to let people approach you. And then I found that, like at book signings, that's what bothered me the most, because people would want to get really close and want to have their picture made and stuff. And it took me a while to really adjust to that, to where I felt comfortable letting people get that close to me, that I didn't know. I was always looking for the gun.
Yeah.
And so it was a big adjustment for me.
It was almost the exact same thing, I'd say. I spent my entire career not telling anybody what I did, not allowed to talk about my job. I was the guy in the corner at a party who just drank by himself and talked to his wife and never brought up anything I did, to now I have to go out and tell everybody, hey, here's what I did. And invariably you get questions about it. Most of the stuff's classified. You can't talk about it. And I've never really personally worried about, I probably should have. There's been a couple of times at book signings where there were some creepy people there. And in fact, one point that it was creepy enough that it scared me, but she turned out to actually just be kind of awestruck. But I thought, she's nuts. She's going to do something. She had a backpack, all kinds of everything. The signals were all red. Who comes to a book signing with a backpack and puts it right in front of them? It just was weird. But I've never had any overt threats. Of course, I didn't have to. I mean, nobody's going to recognize me unless they're in Iraq. Nobody here is going to say anything to me about any of that. So I haven't worried about it. I probably should worry about it more than I do, but I haven't. The hardest part was just like you said, was now I'm supposed to go talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to talk to people. Just buy my book. It's a good book. Read the book. And I've gotten a lot better at it now.
It took a while, though.
Yeah, I did. A long time. I asked my wife before each signing, I'd be like, I want to do this.
Brad, has your twin ever been mistaken for you? Are you identical?
No, we're fraternal. We don't look anything alike.
Okay. Just curious. We've got maybe three more questions. I'll try and focus on the writerly ones first, and then we'll got a good one to end on. For those of you who have agents, how hard was it to get that first agent? How did you find your agent?
I did the first thing I did is, which probably what everybody does, is, does anybody in my family know an agent? And so I had my wife's boss. I'm gonna screw this up. She's gonna get mad at me. My wife's boss knew the producer of Dexter. He was big in the cable industry. Knew the producer of Dexter from Showtime, whose office was next door to a literary agent. So that's who I sent the first one that was all screwed up to. She said, and she agreed to look at it. And she said, yeah, it's real nice, whatever. Send it back. And so then I went into the bookstore, and authors will always thank their agents at the back. And so anybody in my genre, I wrote down the agent's name and went back and looked it up. And I actually didn't get a lot of rejection letters. What I found was they just didn't say anything.
Right,
I mean,
right.
You send it in and it's like
Right.
6 weeks later, I guess that went in the slush pile. I mean, they didn't even have the courtesy to send something back saying we don't want it. But I just kept plugging away at it, and that's how I ended up with mine.
Well, with me, I don't have an agent right now, but how I found my original agent for the publisher that I used was a writer's conference. I pitched at writer's conference, and I highly encourage anybody that's getting into this business to attend writer's conferences.
Yes.
When I attended my first one, I didn't even know the language. I was ready to leave because I didn't know what anybody was talking about. They were talking about traditional publishing, hybrid publishing, self-publishing, and talking about copy editing, all these different editings. And I was just sitting there going, oh, I don't know what anybody's talking about. But I think writers' conferences are great. I mean, you can meet so many people, and not just the agents and publishers, but you meet friends along the way. And then you build your little tribe of people that you can call when you're having a bad day and you need somebody to give you a little sunshine. So I think writers' conferences are a great way to find agents. And Writer's Digest, they put out every year a list of agents, and it will specifically say what they're looking for, what they don't want, and how to send a query and do it exactly like they say.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's what
Exactly. And go to the website and make sure they haven't
Okay.
changed how they want it.
They all want something different because they want to make sure you're actually contacting them and not just shotgunning something out.
Right.
And so some wanted the first 5 pages, some wanted a synopsis, some wanted a query letter, some.
Yeah, some don't want to see anything but your query letter. And
Yeah, I started out doing the Writer's Digest route, and that didn't really work out for me. And it was during that time when it's throwing paper into a black hole. They don't answer. They seem to answer back a little bit better now. I do have an agent now, but when I was first started out, and other authors have mentioned this as well in the past that I've talked to, that it's easier to get published than it is to get an agent, because you're publishing a book and you're getting an agent. They're looking for your career. They want the long haul. The book is just a book. And so I was able to get published without having an agent. And that's not always a great thing, because the publishers, I don't want to say they take advantage, but they don't offer you the best contract. They're giving that to the agent. And so how I finally found an agent, I did the looking in the books and like that. But on social media, I started following a lot of authors that are doing about the same thing I was, and just pay attention to what they do. That I kind of stalking them, I suppose, you could say. And one of them that I really admired had just signed with a certain agent. So I said, well, if she's smart enough to sign with her, I'll submit. And so I did. And finally, I was to a point in my career where the agent could see a career and responded right away. And I actually had a couple agents to choose from, and I'm very happy to be with an agent, because it does open up different doors. If you can get one, do. But only a good one. It's better not to have an agent than to have a bad agent.
I think we got some great advice in response to that question. We have two more. So this is from Betty in Merle's Inlet, and this has to do with titles. It seems that you all title your books before you finish writing them, and you can respond whether or not that's actually the case. But if you do that, how do you know what your characters are going to live up to with a preordained title? So anybody want to talk about where titles come from and when?
It's a huge fight with the publisher. So I always have a working title. If I think back, probably 70% of maybe less than that, probably 60% ended up making it through to the end. For instance, American Trader, that thing wasn't titled. It was already, copy editors were coming back. We still didn't have a title. Because I'll throw a title out there, publishing, they go to the sales team, and is this a good title? No, it's not. Go back. And so we just went back and forth and back and forth. But other books, Ring of Fire, I had the plot, and I said it's going to be titled Ring of Fire, and that went all the way through. I knew what it was going to be. But I honestly, titling is probably the hardest thing I do. I can't stand it. And it's tough to kind of encapsulate the book in a few words on the cover.
Well, I thought I was being brilliant by doing the whole behind the mask, beyond the cabin, below the radar. And that was silly, because then I get up in front of people to talk about my books and I can't remember the name of my books. All so similar. I thought, well, why did I? And then I try to do, cabin and Matt. I still can't do that. I can't keep them straight. So that really wasn't a smart thing on my part. But most of them, I had the title kind of at the start, but Below the Radar was one that I didn't title all the way to the very end. And actually, Behind the Mask changed names a couple of different times too. I can't even remember the first name. I remember the publisher said it sounded like a romance. I don't even remember what it was now, but they didn't like the title of that. So I went with Behind the Mask, just because I wanted to show the mask of the undercover and the mask of the agent and everything. So I always wanted the titles to mean something, but sometimes they get lost in translation, I think.
Yeah, I come up with titles and kind of try to tie it to the theme of the book, and then the publisher changes it, and then I think, oh no, now the theme's lost. But it doesn't really matter.
in mine, I had totally had a different title before, and then I was reading it to a different writers group in North Carolina, and they just absolutely loved what I was reading. But each one said, "But we hate your title." So I spent weeks going through my novel looking for the right phrase. And I finally found it where it belonged, what we set in motion right there. And that was exactly what the story was.
This will be our last question then. And I think it's a good one to end on. I also think it's one that maybe Brad and Dorothy may have answered once before for Adam Parker in a story that ran in the Post and Courier about what writers were doing during the pandemic. So this is from Susie, who's local here. Has there been a silver lining to our stay at home and our social distancing lifestyles? And I assume she means in your writing lives. So well, I want to take that.
No, it was miserable. We went to, luckily I was able to go to Taiwan and Australia before the bushfires and before the COVID hit. And then I got home and COVID hit and I was locked in the house. And you would think that would be the perfect time to type, and maybe it is for some people, but for me, it just drove me nuts. I could not get my head around the book. I was just, everything had stopped, and it was not very conducive to writing. I didn't enjoy it. I mean, I can go to libraries to write and things like that. All those closed down. So now I'm just in my bedroom staring at the same four walls over and over again. So it wasn't very conducive for me.
I had the same experience. It wasn't writer's block. I knew what I wanted to write. I didn't want to write.
Exactly.
I shut down. I shut down completely for months. And I didn't know why, but I didn't want to write. I found myself doing nothing but fishing all day long. That's all I did. That's all I wanted to do. I'd take rod and reel out in the morning and come back at night. And I didn't want to do anything. I don't know. Kind of a weird feeling.
When they shut down the schools, I was under deadline. Shut down schools in March, and my book was due in July. My daughter's 7, and so she's home, and I'm like in a panic over everything, thinking about it. And the last thing I wanted to think about was my book. I needed to focus on learning the new Common Core math that I had no idea what that. I'm starting to get it. So I knew right away after 2 weeks of no writing, I contacted my agent and said, we need to contact the editor and say, this book is not going to be due on time. And thank goodness they understood. And so I got several months and I did get it done, but I'm going to consider that my pandemic book. It was just a struggle to get.
Mm-hmm.
But I think having that deadline is different than the blank page and creating, starting to create.
American Trader, I had a deadline, I missed it.
Oh, you
First
did?
time ever.
Interesting.
I called them up and said, look, it's just what she was saying. I just it's not getting done.
Well, I think that there's more concern about what's happening in the world than you're, actually probably able to articulate in some ways. Here we are locked at our homes and it's out there. It's looming over your creativity. It's like, where are we headed? What are we going to do? Yeah. So I found that actually my rewrites were going much better during this time. I don't know why.
That's the last of our questions, Stephanie. And I'm no longer on camera. You still are, so you get to close us out with some happy thought.
Well, I thank you all for coming. This was, I thought, a really, really good conversation. Really enjoyed listening to each of you talk about your careers before and how you got to the place we are now. And I thank the audience for the questions. I thank the audience for coming and tuning into all of this. And this is a great way to discover more about reading and writing together. And so I wish you all a pleasant weekend and enjoy the rest of the Pat Conroy Literary Festival, which Jonathan has done once again a magnificent job of putting together workshops and interviews and presentations. And of course, life has totally changed for Jonathan. Everything was in person and now everything is an electronic connection. But thank goodness we have them, is what I say. So we are still all connected, but thank you all very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Good. Really good.